Welcome to LHC Unplugged, where you'll hear unscripted conversations about life, faith, the Bible, and today's world with the pastors from LongHillChapel here in Chatham, New Jersey. Ready to grow in your spiritual journey? Let's dive in.
Welcome to LHC Unplugged. I'm Sarah Harrington. I'm the Director of Communications here at LongHillChapel, and I have our lead pastor, Michael Hottie, and our associate pastor, Joey Monteleone.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
So after we ended the podcast last week, I was informed that there are these things called dad movies. Explain this a little bit to me, because this was news.
Take this one, Pastor Michael.
Well, there's this thing that happens when you become a dad. You know, lots of great things happen when we become a dad. You discover a new dimension to life. You love in a way that you've never loved before. And there's a certain type of movie, set of movies that become immensely appealing to you that maybe they weren't before. And that's what a dad movie is. It's just one that dads can talk about together. Like if you get some other dads, you can go talk about the movie and all the dads get very excited about the movie. So it's anything that fits that particular definition.
What's your go-to dad movie?
The daddest of dad movies, there's two of them. One is Harrison Ford and Air Force One, and the other is anything that Tom Clancy has ever done, but especially The Hunt for Red October. Big dad, nerd, submarine, explosion kind of movie. Those are dad movies.
Mine is Bridge on the River Kwai and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, so you have like classic dad movies.
Yeah. I mean,
like my dad was into those dad movies.
Yeah, I grew up with parents and grandparents who watched like stuff that was older than them. They never watched current things. So, you know, at the time, 90s, I think things that you just mentioned would have been current for my dad to watch, but that wasn't his thing. So I had to then go back and realize, oh no, these are great movies. We actually did that last summer where we just went through 90s action movies and, you know, Air Force One was in there.
Get off my plane.
You did that so well.
That's really good.
I've practiced.
So wait, so these aren't rom-coms then?
These are not rom-coms. No. There's a healthy dose of violence in them,
but not gratuitously.
Exactly.
So.
I was just going to say it's not like gore. It's not horror. It's kind of like, you know, 1966 Batman POW violence, where it's like, oh, that guy could have landed that a little bit more authentically, but he didn't, and that's okay. But it's a dad movie, and it's just something that brings all the dads together.
Yeah, and I think it's the other thing with the dad movie is it's something that if being dads, if your kids wandered in, you wouldn't immediately have to pause it because of violence or something like that. And so, yeah, like, you know, Harrison Ford throwing a guy off the plane, that's doesn't have a good ending for that guy, but there's nothing really gratuitous about it. You know, that
scene actually has the Wilhelm scream. Do you know about that?
I'm aware of it.
The Wilhelm scream, if you're not familiar, it's this classic movie. I'm not going to attempt to do it, and you don't have to put it in here, but you've heard it in like every action movie, and now it's kind of this rite of passage for modern movie makers where they try to sneak it in there, but it's just like this comical like and it shows up in all these. So you said
you weren't going to do it, and then you did. You just did it
myself, but it shows up in all the ways, and it shows up when Harrison Ford throws the guy off the plane.
Is there a modern day dad
That's
movie?
what I was going to ask. Are there things? I don't think a dad, when you are in the moment, you don't realize that a dad movie is going to be a dad movie until like much later after the fact. But I'm trying to think what in the modern lexicon of movies is becoming a dad movie.
You know, it's hard because a lot of them have now become subcategories. You've got your superhero movies, you've got your kind of thriller, and I think a lot of the dad movies, like the classic dad movies, are just action, and we've kind of lost that. We don't really have action movies unless Tom Cruise is making it, but it is kind of that Mission Impossible.
Do you think the Mission Impossible movies are dad movies?
I think the first three are, for sure. The new ones are just great movies, but I wouldn't call them dad movies. I'd call them action movies.
Now, what about a movie like Christmas Vacation?
That's a holiday movie.
Yeah, that's a whole other genre.
But that is about being a dad. I mean, that is
full-blown. But a dad movie is not about being a dad. Actually, that's an interesting thought. A dad movie is about being a man.
This is true. But it's also interesting. I was thinking about this with The Hunt for Red October, Air Force One. They're not terribly emotionally investing kinds of movies.
No.
And that's why I watch like Sunday afternoon, long day at church. Sometimes I'll go home and take a nap, and I'll put something like that on because it doesn't require anything from
you can kind of mindlessly watch it, but you are entertained. It's not like a waste of your time.
I'm not sure what this says about us. That are we emotionally unavailable?
No.
Is that what that's
No,
saying?
we're emotionally available to our children, to the things that matter.
Oh, good. There you go. I feel better now.
You're present where you have to be.
Yeah, so I think you can't know a dad movie in the moment at which it comes into existence. You can only know a dad movie in retrospect.
I like that.
I'm going to go with that.
Well, thank you.
This dad approves.
I'm enlightened, and I can't wait to continue to be enlightened by you guys as we get into our topic today, which is misinterpreted Bible verses. So we had a part 1 of this also. This is part 2. Now, the first one I want to start with today is Matthew 7:1. Do not judge, or you too will be judged.
So this is Jesus speaking, and Jesus is speaking in kind of his big first public stump speech, we'd call it. You know, politicians have the speech where they kind of come out and they declare their candidacy, and then they kind of talk about what matters to them. And this is a section of the scriptures in the Gospels called the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is kind of saying, this is what I'm about. This is what I bring to the table. And what he spends the whole time doing is he sets up a contrast between the kingdom of God and the way of the world. And so the whole thing is just there's a lot of verses and parts of verses and sections that we are actually kind of all familiar with. And this is one of them. And what happens with this is we read the words, do not judge, and very often we stop there. And it becomes this thing, well, you shouldn't judge because the Bible says not to judge. And it does say that, but it says it in connection to a bunch of other things, as is usually the case. We talked in the last podcast about the fact that you absolutely have to read the things around the thing. You can't just pick a few words or a verse and build something on them. And do not judge. If you look at it in the Bible, it doesn't have a period after it. It actually has a comma. And so there's something else that comes after it, which is that, or you too will be judged. And verse 2 says, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So Jesus sets up this kind of standard where he's not saying do not judge. He's saying the way you judge is actually the way you will be judged, and the way you judge other people ought to be the way that you judge yourself. And the reason for that is it's impossible for us to not judge. Like, that's just not possible. We actually, as people, as human beings, we're constantly evaluating things. We're evaluating whether things are safe, or whether they're threatening, or whether they're good or bad, or whether we should run away, or whether we should get closer. And so our whole existence is based on judgments. It's based on measurements. It's based on observations, and some of them are accurate and some of them are not. But that's where we have to just be aware that we are judging. We are judging people in how we go through every part of our lives. And when I step down the stairs, have you ever had that thing where you think you're done getting down the stairs and there's one more? Or maybe you think there's one more and there's one less, and you just did this really awkward trip at the end. It's because you failed to judge what's in front of you. And so we're doing that in every area of our lives. We're wired for that. And to think that somehow we can just suspend that when it comes to other people is just not the case. And what happens when we say we're not doing that is we're actually taking the judgments that we are making underground. So they're still there. They're just not out in the front. And what Jesus is kind of saying, I think, instead, is he's saying, you can't avoid doing this. So if you're going to do it, you have to make sure that you remember that you're under the same magnifying glass as everyone else. This is where this really comes home to followers of Jesus, which is this idea that there isn't an us and a them. There's just an us, and then there's God. And when we do that, suddenly everything else, it shifts. It shifts how we see it. And so Jesus he's saying, be very careful about the standard that you choose for judgment. I think a way I've said that before is judge unto others as you would have them judge unto you. Because think about it. We all have moments in our lives that we wish we could have a do-over, or we wish we could erase, and some of them were accidental and some of them were intentional. Would you want to be judged based on that moment? No, of course you wouldn't, and I wouldn't either. Everyone has those moments. And what I think often happens with us with judgment is we judge the people around us by their actions. So they do something that we don't like, or they fall short, or they make a mistake, or they hurt us, or whether it's intentional or accidental. And that's the judgment call that we decide to make for their entire personhood. What we do is we judge ourselves by our intentions. So we say, I messed that up, but what I really meant to do. And so we actually use two different standards. And so Jesus is saying you can't do that. You have to be absolutely consistent. And then there's some more verses that go on after this. In verse 3, he says this verse that some of us are familiar with. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck. And this is connected to that whole thing. And Jesus, I think, is telling his audience, and by extension, he's telling us, that there's some things in our eyes, in the way that we view the world, in our judgment, that actually cause us to inaccurately be able to view other people. The plank is actually an obstacle to us seeing clearly. It's an obstacle to us seeing other people clearly. And he's saying that has to go. That has to come out of your eye. Before you can do that. And the only way that does is when you acknowledge your own plank before the Lord. And you say, you recognize that you too are under the same magnifying glass. And that's the only point. And I think this is true in life. It's true in church. It's true with Christians. It's true with people. Only when you've done that can you actually judge in a helpful way. I'm so thankful for people in my life who see things in me that I don't see in myself. They're able to reflect things back to me when I've missed it. It happens all the time. But those people have to be humble. They have to have the same, they have to be going in the same direction. They have to have my best interest at heart in order to do that. And the same is true the other way around. So there's a lot more attached to this whole don't judge, because we do judge. It's just how we do it.
So do you feel like people sometimes judge as a defense mechanism, almost as a way to protect themselves?
157%.
Ooh, that's specific.
Yeah, it is very specific. But we are, and this is actually something Jesus talks about as well in the same Sermon on the Mount. We have this way of trying to shift the spotlight onto other people so it's not shining on us. And there's something within us that if we can kind of point over there, it allows us to avoid having to look at ourselves or to think that other people are looking at us. And one of the things, this is why I almost hesitate to go here a little bit, but it's why in Christian circles, some of the people who crusade the loudest about certain sins end up being exposed for something very similar to the same thing that they were crusading about. It's almost as if the thing that they hate about themselves is the thing that they see so easily in other people. And so they're quick to just be very judgmental about it. And maybe part of it's an avoidance. Some of it maybe is almost like even an atonement. There's a lot of psychology that's built up in it. But that's absolutely the reason people, they do that is to try to just get the spotlight off of them, because when it's on them, it just exposes the inconsistencies that honestly we all have. We all aspire to things. The Apostle Paul talks about this. He says, the things I want to do, I'm not doing them. Things I wish I wasn't do, I'm doing those things. What in the world is going on with me? And he's just really talking about the human condition, that we all have aspirations and hopes, and we know the kind of people we want to be, and very often we fall very short of the kind of people we want to be. And we're just left with that conundrum of our humanity, of our fallenness, of our sinfulness. And then we try to figure out what to do with it. And one of the easiest things to do is just to shift the focus, to point the focus somewhere else. There's something really deep and pathological. This is why getting under the same magnifying glass of Jesus, who does call us from our sin, but calls us, how did you say it this morning?
The brokenness of humanity, the need for salvation, Jesus is the salvation, and ultimately there will be restoration.
Yeah.
You can apply that metric basically to any sphere, whether that's political, sexual, racial, name a broken area of the world. the Bible has something to say in that paradigm where there is brokenness and we need saving. But Jesus is the salvation of that. And then even though there is salvation right here and right now available to us in all of those spheres, there is ultimate restoration at the end of all things when Christ is fully enthroned in his kingdom, as is his desire. And so when you look at all of these things like, brokenness in judgment, brokenness in condemnation, because that is the difference too. It's not that we're not supposed to judge. We are supposed to judge things rightly. We're not supposed to condemn people in that judgment. How do we do that accurately? How do we do that rightly? I think within that there is a future that's coming where we will be able to discern things correctly because we will be in the presence of Jesus, who also is able to do all those things. And so the call here is not necessarily don't judge and don't just condemn. It's don't be hypocritical.
Yeah, that's what he says.
If you're going to, I think that's verse 5, where he says, you hypocrites, which then he goes on for a little bit more in his Sermon on the Mount, where he's just saying, look, you guys are messed up. You don't have this all together. You guys are evil. And if you who are evil, this goes back to verse 11, if you who are evil know how to even give good gifts to your children, how much better do you think it is in God's economy? How much better do you think God knows your needs? How much better do you think justice and judgment and salvation looks in the grand scheme of God's desire for the world? Rest in that, and at the same time, don't be hypocritical with the way you live.
Yeah, and there's back to you were talking about how we will see things clearly. I think Jesus even gives a little bit of a precursor to that. He says you can begin to do that now, but there's this plank in your eye that you have to remove. And I was thinking about in my previous house, I had this detached garage, and the previous owner had built a bar in the garage.
Awesome.
Hey guys, come on over and let's hang out in my garage. And
I bet he was watching dad movies.
He might have been watching
100%.
dad movies, but it was just this kind of, I'm like, it's a garage. Why do I need this? And so there was a point at which I decided that it was where I was going to take it down. And I have this really big, it's I think a 2.5 or 3 pound demolition hammer. It's this huge hammer that you can just knock things like studs and wood and drywall out of the way. And I just went to town on this thing, and it was a lot of work. And it reminded me that when you're removing planks, it takes a lot of work, and it actually takes a good bit of effort. It sometimes takes swinging the hammer. And we ought to, not in a destructive, condemning sense, but we ought to be all about swinging the hammer in our lives. We really ought to be about doing the hard, difficult thing when it comes to us. But Jesus, in the passage, he contrasts that with this speck that's in our brother's eye.
Right. How do you get a speck out?
Yeah, how do you get a speck out with incredible precision?
Yeah.
That's the tweezers.
It's tweezers.
It's the tweezers,
yeah.
yep.
But what if you took the 2.5 pound demo hammer to your brother's eye? You'd destroy him. And so a lot of times we swap the tools.
Yeah.
Instead of swinging the hammer in our own lives, and in a redemptive way. Think about it when I was getting that bar out of there with the hammer. It's like I was making space for something better. And that's what this really that's how we ought to look at our lives, is what can I do with the help and the power and the empowerment of the Spirit of God? What are the things that need to go to make room for something better? Whereas once we've begun to do that, then we can go look at our brother's eye and with care and with love and concern and relationship, we can walk with them around the specks. My kids, sometimes they get splinters, they get specks, they get these little things in their hands because they're playing outside or something like that. It is the hardest thing as a parent for me to get, with the tweezers and a needle or whatever I need to do to dig that thing out, because I know it's for the best, but I also love my kid and I hate when it hurts them. And it's that kind of attitude that we ought to go into this speck business with the people around us. It's knowing that it has to come out. It's knowing that if it stays, it'll produce infection and it'll hurt and it'll get worse. It won't get better. But to walk with each other and to do that, that's the other thing, is my son could not remove that himself very easily. And so having someone who loves them, who's done the hard work, if I couldn't see when I'm doing that, it would just be disastrous in any number of ways. But if I had, a plank, so to speak, I wouldn't be able to do that. But with that plank removed and with that same spirit of love, then you can do incredibly precise things. And even though it hurts my son when I do that, he knows I love him. Like if a random person showed up with a needle and tweezers and went to town on my son's hand, like that's probably illegal. But
yeah, probably.
But it's hurtful. But when you have that context, that's when it actually starts to all fall into place.
So now we've talked about kids a little bit. We talked about dad movies on the front end. Mm-hmm. So our next verse we're going to read is Proverbs 22:6. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it.
This is a fun one. What's interesting, again, you need context. So the book of Proverbs is a book of wisdom written by Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, right?
Yeah, and some others.
And some others, yes. Right. There's additional authors in there. And what's interesting about the book of Proverbs is a lot of people just kind of take it at face value. They're very short. Sometimes they build on each other. Sometimes they don't.
No, they're good bookmark, bumper sticker kinds of things because they're compact.
Yeah, so. And you can kind of take them and apply them. The tension with that is you have to apply them right. So you get a verse like this and you say, okay, train up a child in the way it should go, and when it's old, it will not depart. The problem with that is not a guaranteed formula for parenting, as everyone in this room and listening can attest to. I wish it was. But so many parents come to a challenge with their kids and then they say, well, what the heck? I've been raising them the way they should go, and now they're not following after God. They're not doing what I think they should do. And that's where this starts to break down. What's hard and why this subject has a lot of tension in it is because there are some basic things that we all want for our kids. There's just some really good things that we know they should do, things that we know they shouldn't do. Some of that's built on past experience. Some of that's morality. Some of that's spirituality. And then separated from that, we have our personal desires that we consciously or unconsciously impose on our kids, thinking that our ideas are, quote, the way they should go. And so we have to be incredibly not hypocritical, like we were just saying with the other verse, but also incredibly honest with ourselves about what is and is not the way a child should go. So that's how we first have to approach this verse. We haven't even gotten to it, right? Then there's wisdom and experience, very similar to what Pastor Michael was saying. They do inform us. We can make judgment calls based on the lives that we've lived and the experiences that we've had. And we can give that to our kids as a gift. We can also give that, whether they like it or not, based on what's best for them. And I don't want to say that comes from a bad place. In fact, it comes from a very good place. That's just good parenting. Giving our kids, a leg up from what we were given, based on some of our experience. But the question that I was confounded with, and I'm still wrestling with, is what is the source of the training for my kids? Is it God's word? Is it my desires? Is it my plans? Are those two overlapping in any way? Because I think that maybe they can. I think God gives us desires. We talked about that on a previous episode. And I think he gives us good things for our kids as well. But can you hold that loosely and recognize that God also has plans for your kids? The tension I find with a verse like this is that we should train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart. And we look at that and we say, okay, if I do something, then my kid is set. And at its very core, that sounds like a works-based, foolproof way to ensure good things spiritually for our kids. And yes, there are responsibilities and things we have to show up to as parents, but also we have to remember that God has this under control for our kids, and I struggle so much with that. I just do.
Yeah, it's as you were talking, something I was thinking about is how much being a parent it opens up the biggest mirror ever into you.
Yep.
Like when you're a parent, you suddenly see parts of you that you see them in your kids, like the best parts, and some of the parts you're like, don't do that, because you have been through the same journey. But your responses, your reactions, all those other things, there's nothing like your kids to put a mirror onto your own humanity. And so more than I would care to admit, a lot of our parenting instincts actually are responses or reactions to what we grew up with and what we grew up as.
Yes.
And so sometimes the way we think our kids ought to go isn't really what God had in mind at all. It's the way we think they ought to go based on how we went.
Mm-hmm. And so what this verse does not mean is teach your kids some Bible facts so that they become good people. What this means is, and I've written this down, and it's something I check every single morning, shape an environment and give your kids a rhythm and a way of seeing the world that's centered on Jesus with the life that you lead. That is incredibly different from just reading a bunch of Bible verses so that hopefully they pick it up. This is, can you model an environment that is slow to get angry, quick to listen? That's a verse in the book of James. Can you model love sacrificially with your spouse? Can you control yourself with self-control like a fruit of the Spirit? Can you exhibit joy in the midst of pain? Can you provide an environment for your kids where you fail, where you struggle, where you wrestle with hard passages of Scripture, and that is the training? Can you give them that? That's a lot harder than just, well, train up a child in the way they should go. Okay, well, then I'll just bring them to church. By all means, bring them to church, 10:15 every Sunday. But absolutely. But this verse is way more, you said the word before, this is way more surgical and way more introspective, instead of just, okay, if I do the right things, then God will take care of my kid. No, can you create the right environment and become the right person that models a Spirit-filled, intentional walk with Jesus? That's a lot harder to do.
I would almost challenge it to say, this training isn't for them, it's for us.
Yeah,
as parents.
100%, because they will not necessarily remember you for everything that you said and everything that you tried to instill in them. They will remember the safeness of the home. They will remember the way that you looked at them. They will remember how important they felt at times when they needed it most. It's all the little things we don't think of. And when I see train up a child, to me, it's like, okay, what's the program? What can I put them in? What can I give them as a structure so that they turn out the right way? Well, that's formulaic, and that's not spiritual. That's not what God's desire is. You know, you tell us all the time, you are the right people for this job. And something I tell my wife is, you know, on the days where it's very difficult and the kids are challenging us, one of the things I say is, of all the people in the world, God thought it was best that you and I get to shape this person. Mm-hmm. That's humbling, but it also involves incredible responsibility. And so I see a verse like this that says, just be honest with your shortcomings. You can't be perfect. You're not supposed to be. But God thought it was best that the person underneath you, your child, the one that you love the most, would be shaped by you. And can you show up to that?
I think there's one other thing I want to add to that, and that's kind of the reverse of the verse, which I know for some parents is almost a source of condemnation for them, where if their kids don't go the way, like that on the surface looks like the way of that Jesus would lead them, that they just have this incredible crisis that says, did I not do enough? Did I not do a good job? Did I miss it? Did I not try hard enough? Was I, not a good enough example? And the thing I would just say in the midst of that is the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of God is that He always redeems things. And He's always writing a much longer story than we think He is, than life would seem like it is. There's always hope. There's always God is at work. There's seeds that have been planted that we don't know when they're going to sprout up. But there's faithfulness of God that something will and that they will. And you know, when you feel that sense of condemnation, that's not from God. That's from the enemy. And I would just want to encourage any parent that's kind of doing the reverse math of this, that like, okay, my kids are not where I think they ought to be or where I hope they would. And that's obviously for all of us who are parents, that's a really hard thing because we all have the best dreams and aspirations and hopes for our kids. But it's just the recognition that they are their own person, but God is always still at work and the story's not done yet.
Yeah, and your influence in your kids' lives, hopefully, is not limited to 18 years. You know, hopefully there's an ongoing shift of a relationship. Now, it ebbs and flows, and I'll be the first to admit that sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. But to trust God with your kids, I think, is the ultimate act of submission, to ultimately say, I did what I could, not in an excusatory way, in a way that, you know, takes your hands off the wheel and avoids responsibility, but to say, I showed up as best I could, I was present, I pointed them to Jesus, and now what God does in their life is up to God, and I just get to show up to that as a friend, as a peer, you know, and hopefully that's the progression. I know it's easier said than done, because then you you mix in emotion with all of this. These are your kids. You held them, you changed their diapers, and you remember all of those moments. It's an incredibly complex thing. One of the things that I hold to with that is, how does God feel about his children? How does God feel about when we don't do exactly what he wants for us, what is our best? He doesn't condemn himself, and he doesn't look down on us as though we're complete failures and we're never welcomed back into the family. I think there's always, like you said, there's always redemptive work going on. And so to trust him in that process, regardless of where the outcomes may have landed, I think is the bigger spiritual formation.
Because the story's not over yet.
Exactly.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to LHC Unplugged. As a reminder, we meet in person on Sunday mornings at 10:15 at LongHillChapel in Chatham, New Jersey. We also live stream our service, so you can also listen online at 10:15 on Sundays at lhcnj.net. And if you have any questions for our pastors to answer on our podcast, you can send them right to us at questions@lhcnj.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you next time.